Hey everyone, it's David Sirota. I'm just back from the People's Summit from this weekend in Chicago, where Bernie Sanders gave quite a speech criticizing the Democratic Party, saying it has to decide which side it's on major economic issues, and pushing single payer. The New York Times, the way it covered that speech and also the Georgia congressional race, I think provides some good lessons on the fight between the two sides of the Democratic Party, also some good lessons on how the media will cover that fight. So the story in the Times, which I think you should read, says that the base of the party at the People's Summit is pushing for an agenda, and that party leaders are concerned that pushing that agenda will make it harder for the party to win elections in swing districts, like the district that Jon Ossoff in Georgia is running in. And it basically quotes Ossoff saying that there's no way that he will support, quote, any move to a single-payer healthcare system, and it quotes him saying that he will oppose efforts to raise taxes on the super wealthy. He's running in a conservative-leaning suburban district outside of Atlanta. And so the idea is that he doesn't want to alienate conservative voters in that district. And in the Times story, that is pitted against what Bernie Sanders and the progressive wing of the party is pushing for. And what was interesting about the Times story in specific was that it portrays the Democratic Party's establishment, the leaders of the party machine, as being concerned that pushing a progressive agenda will make candidates unelectable in swing districts. And what I think is important about the way that's framed is that these are the same set of party leaders who have been running the party as it's lost the White House, Congress, governorships, and more than 1,000 state legislative seats across the country. Now, not all of that has to do with the particular agenda that the Democratic establishment has been pushing. I mean, there's stuff like redistricting that changes the entire map of the electoral system. But I do think it's important to note that as there is this battle inside the party, you see a lot of the Washington media continuing to portray the progressive agenda as the agenda that may make Democrats unelectable, as opposed to a framing that says the party leaders who have overseen an electoral record, an electoral disaster, are the ones who need to answer for why they have had trouble creating a party that wins elections. I mean, let's remember, much of what the progressive movement is pushed for is quite popular when you look at polls about those issues. And so it's important to watch how this stuff is framed. Now, when I interviewed Bernie Sanders after his speech for my podcast, I asked him, can the Democratic Party have a big enough tent? Should it have a big enough tent to include his views and the views of millions of progressives on economic issues, and also the views of candidates like, for instance, Jon Ossoff, who's saying he's diametrically opposed to some of the key economic positions on taxes and on health care that the progressive wing of the party has pushed. Here's what Sanders said.
Look, I think in terms of the most important issues facing this country, which would include finally demanding that the wealthy and large corporations start paying their fair share of taxes, moving toward universal health care, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, raising the minimum wage, etc., etc. Vast majority of the people support those ideas. Now, there are more conservative districts, and I can understand somebody who's more conservative running for office. That's fine. There are parts of this country where people are split, where honest people are not. You know, I have a 100% lifetime pro-choice voting record. There are people who disagree with me. I supported the candidate who was running for mayor of Omaha, who I thought put together a very strong progressive coalition. Disagree with him on one issue. So, in general, the momentum is with us toward making the Democratic Party far more progressive. It will not have progressive candidates or strong progressive candidates in every single district on every single issue, and I think we have to understand that.
Now, Bernie right there seems to be making a pretty pragmatic argument, arguing that basically not every Democrat is going to be progressive on every issue, but that essentially, the way I hear him talking, essentially having the Democratic Party in power will allow for progressives in the party to have a better shot at enacting their agenda. I think it's a pretty shrewd argument. It's a pretty, again, pragmatic argument. But I think these arguments over the policy agenda as we move towards the 2018 election are only going to get more intense. And I think that Sanders this weekend started making a case that that the progressive agenda is not mutually exclusive from electability. That in fact, in order to be electable, Democrats have to stand for something. That's what he is arguing. Now, whether party leaders accept that argument or not, that's a bigger question. Remember, they perceive themselves to be answering to not just the party's base, but the party's donors. And the donors, the donor class, often wants different things than what the party's voters want. And so the party leaders who don't have a grassroots fundraising base, like the Sanders wing of the party, they are trying to, I think, sort of represent what their donors want without necessarily fully alienating the party's base. That's been their strategy, this attempt to balance things and kind of have it both ways. Whether that works in the 2018 election is anybody's guess. And look, the stakes of this debate are incredibly high. The Democrats should have a decent shot to win races across the country in the era of Trump. But I think Sanders' argument is that if they nominate candidates who are trying to appease big money, who are trying to appease corporate power, who are trying to appease the donor class, the Democrats will have a harder time of seizing that opportunity and making that opportunity into an electoral victory. Stay tuned for it. This debate is only going to get more intense.